Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Global Expansion, How to Build a Sales Team Overseas Overnight. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, and a link to the on-demand version will be shared with all registrants after the event. We encourage you to submit questions at any time using the chat feature. We'll address questions at the end of the session, time permitting. If we do not get to your question, we will reach out to you after the event. You can also access additional resources and helpful links through the event portal at any time during the session. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's host, Hannah Allen, Managing Director at memoryBlue. Hannah brings 6 years of operational leadership and world-class execution to memoryBlue. As a Director of Global Operations, formerly with Operatics, Hannah has driven high-impact, scalable sales development programs that power B2B tech organizations. Her strategic leadership was recognized in 2024 when she was named Most Influential B2B Software Business Leader at the prestigious Influential Businesswoman Awards, marking her second consecutive win. With deep expertise in account-based sales development and global outreach, Hannah ensures teams consistently hit ambitious pipeline and revenue objectives. She's known for her process-driven mindset, dedication to operational excellence, and ability to harmonize cross-functional teams around shared goals. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Chris Doggett and Ryan Briggs. So for Chris, he is a senior go-to-market executive focused on creating highly productive sales and marketing teams for organizations ranging from early stage to well-established global companies. He has a track record of success at creating and executing strategies to grow revenue and drive sustainable improvements in profitability. Chris also serves as an operating advisor to investment firms and their portfolio companies, drawing on more than 2 decades of deep operational and leadership experience to identify value creation opportunities and assist operators in a successful execution of programs to achieve them. Chris also serves as a mentor and coach to early and mid-career sales leaders, as well as advisors to CEOs and boards of directors. So welcome, Chris. And with Ryan, I have the pleasure of working with Ryan on a daily basis. He is our Global Account Executive and Sales Team Lead for Europe for memoryBlue. Ryan is a seasoned sales leader with memoryBlue, formerly Operatics, where he currently serves as Global Account Executive and Sales Team Lead for Europe, with a proven track record supporting B2B tech companies in rapidly scaling their market presence. Ryan's strategic approach and customer-first mindset have consistently delivered pipeline expansion and go-to-market success. Before joining memoryBlue, Ryan transitioned from a decade-long career in the automotive industry, bringing refined account management expertise and a resilient, results-focused outlook to the tech sales landscape. His passion for driving impact, coupled with thoughtful leadership, empowers teams to exceed ambitious targets and build lasting client relationships. So welcome both Chris and Ryan.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, so this is just a little bit about Chris. I'm sure people have a moment to have a little read through. Chris, is there anything you'd like to add? And then we can get started.
Sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Revenue Process Improvement, it's a firm that I started in 2024, which really focuses on go-to-market expertise and bringing that expertise to B2B software companies. And as Hannah mentioned, we do that in a variety of different ways. And it's a small firm that's very focused on doing bespoke work for each client that we serve.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris. Now, obviously doing that, you've worked a lot globally and had to scale teams, like we mentioned in the intros, from US to EMEA to APAC regions as well. So it'd probably be good to understand from you initially, what are the challenges that you faced whilst doing that? What are the things that people don't typically think about when they want to grow overseas?
Sure. Well, Hannah, as you mentioned in the intro, I've been doing this for more than 20 years. But I want to reassure the audience in preparation for this talk, I did go pull the current stats and do some quick research. So I'll share with you current information in addition to that span of experience. There's a lot that that has been similar over the years. And when we look at where firms are today, it's very common for U.S. firms to want to do international expansion. In fact, 90% of U.S. firms, according to the latest research, believe that international expansion is essential for their long-term success. But about half of them, 49% of them, have been discouraged or prevented from expanding internationally. And so it's both a high need and a high bar. And your question really is around what are the challenges. The first challenge that usually slows companies down is really just their ability to answer questions that come up as they begin thinking about doing expansion. It's often a combination of a lack of expertise and experience with that market and access to current information. So market research and expertise is the first challenge just when they're in the planning phase. And then as companies are looking at differences or recognizing that there are differences between their current market, say, for example, US operations and operations overseas, they begin to uncover that there are cultural differences which can be significant. There are differences in how you manage talent that are different across different markets. Pricing strategies often vary. There, in some cases, are very significant differences in legal and regulatory requirements. And then there are other considerations around technology, around supply chain, et cetera, that come into play as well. So I'm happy to drill down into any of those areas, but those are some of the highlights of things that make it challenging when you begin to think about expanding abroad.
Thank you, Chris. And what would you say has been the most surprising of perhaps those cultural differences that you've noticed? And perhaps, Ryan, you can obviously then relate to some of the cultural differences we see working between the US and EMEA as well.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay,
for
Chris.
my part, Ryan, I'll kick off maybe. For my part, I think cultural differences come down to things like communication style, cultural norms in terms of how business is done, how you do relationship building and how important that is varies depending on the market. And then as you're working it from a sales perspective, the decision-making processes tend to vary quite a bit or vary significantly across different markets. So from a sales perspective, those would be probably the four big ones in terms of cultural differences.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. I think also, knowing the cultural differences in terms of, do the French like to have small talk when you're, prospecting into them, for example, or do they like to relationship build at the beginning of a call? Often as well, there's cultural nuances around, should you email first? Should you introduce your company, your service, before then obviously, cold calling somebody to have a conversation on the phone? So it is around knowing what to do when you're in those different regions, those different countries.
And it makes a big difference. Some of the latest research shows that companies that do a good job of demonstrating cultural awareness when they're international companies have a 35% higher chance of being successful in that market. So it's not a rounding error. It can make a huge difference in terms of how successful you are in that market.
And I think it comes back to the point of you, doing the research, the market research beforehand, because it could be an American company that they don't have any boots on the ground in Europe. They don't know the region that well, so they need to do their research beforehand. Because, for example, speaking to software vendors every day, they might want to target the DAC region, for example. But we know, from our services that we provide, that you are going to get better results when you have a native German speaker for that region. France, Spain, Italy, for example, native speakers do get better results within those countries. But then it comes back to, I was having this conversation this morning with quite a large software vendor who've got large presence in Europe, but it's really understanding their internal sales team setup as well, because there's no point starting the sales process in terms of prospecting in the native German language if you're then going to go onto a sales call and even offer support once you've sold to that customer. The technical support that they need. If you're not going to offer it in the native language, then you pretty much might as well start the prospecting journey in English. So you've got to really think about the sales team structure, I would say, as well, when you're expanding globally. So do you want to invest in an AE, an SE in Germany, France, Spain, the UK, or do you want to dip your toes in the market and start with the English-speaking territories, because you can target the UK, Ireland, the Nordic countries, your Scandinavia, Benelux as well. You can get away with targeting in English. So there's sort of the regions that I would say, if you're looking to expand into the European market, they start with those English-speaking territories.
Thanks, Ryan. And I'd say that same for APAC regions as well, making sure we got native speakers in a lot of those countries, like Japan, for example, as well.
Absolutely, Hannah. Japan's a big one. And it's not just about language, although language is really important in Japan, having native speakers there. But there are also, some more formal business culture norms that you see in Japan. I'll never forget when I first started doing business in Japan and started traveling there. There are customs from things like how you hand somebody a business card. You need to hold it by both corners, and you don't bow, but you present it to them facing them. Usually people from the US should have a business card that's English on one side and Japanese on the other. If you look at a lot of companies, whether it's Japan or it's Germany or Switzerland are ones that come to mind for me, they have a much more formal and reserved culture than we do. The US, we tend to be very enthusiastic, very forward. We're often accused of being pushy. And, in some of these other countries, that's not how business is done. And in Japan, they have something that's called nimawashi, which is that you need to build consensus through getting to know people, having informal discussions, before you can even get to doing formal meetings. They really emphasize relationship building over transactional efficiency, if you will. And so speaking the language is important, but even if you have, folks who can speak the language, you also have to account for things just being done differently as you go to different countries. And therefore, you have to have different expectations for a sales team, for example, in terms of the length of the sales cycle and how they're going to engage and how many meetings they need to go through. It can vary quite a bit.
Thank you, Chris. So 100% we need to adapt the approach, adapt the mindset, and obviously do the research first before you start going into these countries and saying, great, I want to expand globally, I want to go into a different country. You need to definitely do that research. And if it's not something you can actually accommodate within your organization, then that's where some of these outsourced companies can come in, or you can obviously hire consultants as well into that. So what would be your top tips then, Chris, for an organization who's saying, right, I know I want to go into this country. I know I need to consider the cultural differences, my approach, and the language. What would then be your next top tips for preparing your international go-to-market plan?
Sure. Well, I think at a high level, the approach is, first you need to figure out, assess what your options are and define the strategy. And then you need to do planning in terms of how you're going to enter that market. And those are the first two steps before you even start hiring and start signing contracts and everything else. In terms of assessing your options and defining your strategy, you need to be very clear about what are your objectives for expanding into that market. To the point you just made, you need to conduct market research. You need to understand and have answers for, what are the legal and regulatory requirements that we have in the market? How are we going to handle currency fluctuations and pricing? How are we going to handle hiring of talent? Are we going to hire talent, or are we going to partner in that market? We talked a lot about cultural differences. How are we going to handle those cultural differences? So I think the first step is figure out what your goals are, do your market research, and see how does it compare to different markets. And usually that means in order to do that efficiently, you need to be working with some experts who know that market and who have access to data so they can answer the questions that inevitably come up, and hopefully can provide a comparison. One way to do this is to think about, all right, what are the 2 or 3 markets that we could go into that are going to be the easiest first step for us? And then let's have somebody help us compare and contrast those from a pros and cons standpoint, and help us understand and compare which ones are we ready to go into and which ones are we not. So that's all of that sort of under the umbrella of assessing your options and defining your strategy, and then or defining your overall strategy for which markets you're going to go into. And then once you choose a market, there's another round of strategy and planning that you need to do to do that appropriately.
Thanks, Chris. One thing I would also add to that, you mentioned about the hiring, the legalities, the cost of it, is also how to manage that team as well. Particularly for somebody in my position, for example, I have got a Pan EMEA team, Pan APAC team, and each of those agents, each of those reps are individuals, and they need to be treated with all those different cultural nuances in mind as well when you're obviously talking contractual pieces, holiday, even things right down to Christmas. Quite often in the UK we'll work Christmas Eve, but actually Christmas Eve in a lot of the European countries is their holiday day. So it's little things like that to consider.
Yeah, I guess once you've obviously made those decisions as well, then it's about, are you doing that internally, externally? Like you said, Chris, are you going to work with partners that actually, know the landscape in Europe? And I think, from speaking to marketing and sales leaders every day, that is one of the reasons why they would utilize a partnership like memoryBlue, because we have that experience within the local markets. We have data, we have databases within this market, but management, like you said, Hannah, is a massive thing. If you're expanding into the EMEA market, you might have a SDR, BDR manager that's based in the US. Then you've got to think about the time zone differences. East Coast is five hours, Central Time is 6, and the West Coast is 8. So to actually spend good quality time with an SDR and be able to train them and monitor them and get the best results from them, it's very difficult to do it without having somebody that's working with them aligned in the working hours, 8 hours a day, helping them, supporting them.
Thanks, Ryan. So we've spoken a lot about the challenges. I know we focus quite a lot on that, but actually it's not all challenges. When it's working well, it works very, very well, and obviously it can give you that global presence and obviously grow your business massively. So again, probably for you to start off with, Chris, be good to understand what, the winning across market, what is the key to that international success, and how do you also measure success in different regions as well?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, some general recommendations. Too many companies make the mistake of doing, a ready, fire, aim approach. They don't do enough planning, and they don't really understand what they're getting into. There's, somebody has the idea that, geez, we should expand into this market, and people are, want to jump in and start to execute right away. But that planning and understanding the market is really important, and that's where, again, working with experts, working with people who have experience in that market already is really important. Another key to success, in my experience, is don't try to expand into too many different regions at once. Pick one market to start out with, and the one that you think is the smallest jump or the least challenging for you. And we've hit on the different, potential challenges. Look at all of those challenges. It's not just about, one facet like language. It might, somebody might say, oh, let's go to, we're a US company, let's go to the UK because we all speak English, notwithstanding jokes that I might make around we're two countries separated by a common language. But but even there are cultural differences, and so, pick one that's going to be the smallest jump. And then when you do it, take an iterative approach. Expect that you're going to have to keep reworking and refining this over time, and you're going to learn things. And I would say, don't do it remotely, for sure. You probably should have a person locally who can help spearhead the effort. And as we've talked a little bit about on this call already, a partnership first approach is usually the fastest and best way to go. And that means you partner with a firm that already has a presence, already has a team there as a first step, and they become an extension to your team. That might be a joint venture, that might be a contract, that might be a licensing agreement. There are different ways that can happen, but there's a huge advantage to if you want to move quickly and you want to be successful, to partnering with a local firm. And then last but not least, we've noted that there are challenges that a lot of that comes down to, from a sales leader perspective, concerns that other functions like legal and finance might have. So make sure you engage them early and often. Set the expectation that it's going to take some time to get ramped up. These are never instant add water solutions. And make sure that you always leave the door open to changing your strategy, whether it's changing the amount of investment that you're making or even having an exit strategy, if for some reason things don't go as planned in the market or your business decides to go in a different direction. So those are some thoughts that I'd have from my experience.
Yeah, I think you touched on one as well there, Chris, around expectations, and I think that is like a key point when you're going into a new market, is setting realistic expectations. Obviously, it's a new market for a lot of these companies, so you may be doing really well in the US market, but you may find it takes a little bit longer to ramp up and get to the results you want in a different market. So setting realistic expectations if you're doing this internally, but also if you're doing this externally as well. But I feel like if you're doing it externally with a partner, at least you're working with somebody that knows the market, and they can guide you and set realistic expectations and what we'd be looking to achieve on similar programs, similar software companies, but also within similar markets. And one of the things that I would also say is, for us as a partner, we are looking to work as an extension of our customers' teams, and we want to be seen as an extension, and the feedback loop is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the feedback loop, if you are working as an extension of each other's teams, you have daily communication. We have weekly business reviews where we review the calls, we review what meetings have we booked, who's the message resonating with. Is it that we're booking more meetings within retail, or are we getting a lot of traction within manufacturing? Do we want to double down on in manufacturing? What personas are we getting the best traction with? It's about feeding back all of that information, but also the no's are just as important as the yeses in those early days, because why does somebody not want to take a meeting with us? Is it that they're using your competitor, or is it that they've given us another objection that your team haven't even thought about previously? So how do we get around that objection together? So it's really about working together to refine the message and refine the ICP, as we work together week on week through a program.
I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. That's why I said, plan on taking an iterative, incremental approach, that you're going to keep reworking this. And the key to that, to your point, is having a partner who understands the local market and can do that interpretation and translation for you and say, here's what's working in the messaging, here's what's not, here's what we need to do differently in our approach, or here's something we should try. Because otherwise you're trying to figure it out in a market that you're not sitting in, that you don't know well. And the partnership approach is just going to get you to success so much faster than you would otherwise. I think that's really good advice. And in terms of setting expectations, I agree with you too. It's, a partner can help you understand how fast decisions are made and what that process looks like in that local market. I talked about how cultural differences really can influence the decision process a lot. And it's important with these things to set realistic expectations internally, so that when your organization is reviewing how is that program going, you're not disappointed because you expected something you shouldn't expect, and then the program starts to get questioned. The beauty of expanding internationally is that it's essentially all greenfield opportunity for your company. There's huge upside potential. You're expanding your addressable market massively when you go when you go abroad, but it takes time. You know, you don't have a brand or brand awareness or brand equity in that market. You don't have referenceable customers usually in that market, et cetera. And so it's you need to be realistic that it's going to be crawl, walk, run. A partner can speed that process up for you, but I wouldn't expect for it to have huge material results on your sales in the first year. I do think you can set realistic expectations and measure your success along the way. And that's about building pipeline. That's about looking at conversion rates, looking at the cost of generating the pipeline, those sorts of metrics, leading indicators as to where you can expect to go. But the big mistake somebody would make is say, oh yeah, we're going to turn this program on and it's going to deliver X amount of revenue for us in the next 3 months or the next 6 months. No, it's going to take a little bit more time than that to get ramped up. And when it does, you're going to be glad that you did it, but you have to build it.
Thank you, Chris. I was going to say, actually, you made some really good points there. Again, things to consider: the economical and political climates in those regions as well impact the sales cycle, how long it's going to take. It could be that you want to target central government, for example, and there's going to be different frameworks in different countries that you need to understand, adhere to, and again, different buying cycles from them as well. And again, one of the good things about using a partner, rather than necessarily, if you put all your eggs in one basket, you go and hire your own company, get your own office block or what have you, then that exit strategy becomes much more difficult. And if you discover partway through that actually your market is a lot more saturated than you thought, or you do need to pivot in terms of expertise around that verticals and market segments that you're going after, then it's going to be much harder to do with one or two guys that you've hired and obviously then need to find something else for or retrain them, which again, using a partner are able to cover that training, that onboarding, and again, to Ryan's point, help you understand what the market looks like and what that brand awareness, to your point as well, is going to look like as well. So thank you very much for that. Is there anything else you would add in terms of, again, measuring the success?
I think in terms of measuring the success, ultimately you want to be able to look back after the first year and see two things. One, that the program is paying for itself, that it's not a drag on profitability for the company. I think that's a reasonable expectation for building a business from scratch in a foreign country. Is that after a year you're going to at least be at break-even point. And then the other one is forward-looking. What's the trajectory of the business? What's the rate of growth that you're seeing in terms of your ability to build pipeline? And based on your initial conversion rates on that pipeline, what do you expect the bookings or the revenue to track on? What is that? If you take a line and plot it and then extend that forward, where do you expect that to be? And look at that in the context of the rest of your business. Is the rest of your business growing at that rate? Usually not. Usually this is a much higher growth rate. And if you project that forward, if you project that line forward, what's the total amount of revenue or bookings that's going to be delivered in the upcoming year, in the next 12 months? And how material is that to your business? And if you're doing it well, what you're going to find is it's significantly material, it's profitable, and it's growing at a higher rate. Maybe it's not even profitable. Maybe you're just running it as a break even, but it's increasing the growth rate in your company, which is hugely valuable for companies. So those are the things that I would look at a high level. We could have a whole other discussion about drilling down into the granular metrics of conversion rates at different stages of the sales cycle and rep productivity and things like that. But those are the high level ones.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris. I think last point would be there's also lots of low-hanging fruit when you're moving across regions as well, particularly with those big enterprise. I know you've obviously worked a lot in different size organizations, but predominantly enterprise. And you can go into those enterprise companies with HQs in the UK and then go over to the US or vice versa as well. Once you've got your foot in the door with one, then it certainly should open doors for others as well.
Yeah, and
So
on that as well, Hannah, I guess like, with current customer base as well, you might be working with an account just in North America, but they might be a global company and they have presence in Europe or APAC or wherever it may be. So that's low hanging fruit as well, is expanding those accounts, those customers that you currently do have, and it's an easy way to drive pipeline and revenue in other markets in the early days.
That's a great point. That's where, again, a partnership, partnering with companies that have a local presence, local language, local knowledge around cultural norms can give you a big boost, because you may be working with a company that's got an affiliate or a subsidiary company in that other market that you've never done business with, that you can break into very easily because the parent company or the affiliate is already doing business with you, has already established that, it's already been proven and tested. And you really just need somebody who knows how to do business in the local market to go have those conversations and drive that expansion. And that is in fact very good low hanging fruit, especially for companies that, to your point, sell to international companies. It's something that it doesn't take very many of those deals to all of a sudden put this into high gear and into profitability.
Thank you, Chris. That is a perfect segue, thank you, into talking about the partnership. Obviously, everybody has joined this call because of memoryBlue, and obviously with you as well, Chris, with your experience too, of course. But Ryan, over to you to just wrap us up with a little bit about memoryBlue and what our outsourced sales services are.
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you a quick brief on that. So yeah, obviously we help companies with global expansions all the time, but we're really supporting mainly B2B technology companies with pipeline and revenue growth. And we do that through a number of services, which I can come on to just briefly. But in terms of us as a company, we do have global presence. We have nine offices globally, 7 in the US, all dotted around in different time zones, 1 here in the UK, and then 1 over in Singapore. So we actually have around 450 plus native speakers working for us globally, and we cover 22 languages. So we that really does allow our customers to scale globally, and it really we know the cultural nuances around these countries that we're prospecting into. The fact that we only predominantly work with B2B technology companies, all of our resources, our management, like Hannah and her teams, they are very good at just understanding those complex value propositions and really articulating the value of software and services as well, to those end users that we're prospecting into. So we work with all size of companies. They could be startups, companies with a MVP that they want to take to market, and then we work with enterprise clients as well. You can see some on that slide there, Cisco, Amazon, Airbnb, for example. So real mixture in companies that we are working with. We can support them in many ways. So sales development, we have obviously outsourced SDR services, also quota carrying reps as well. So we can close business for our customers as well. Marketing is another thing that we didn't really touch on that much during this webinar, but local content, that's another thing that you need to think about. Do you have local content? Is your website in the local language, for example, if you're really focusing on a particular region? So we have a global marketing team where we can do anything from really content creation, SEO, PPC, targeted email campaigns, LinkedIn campaigns, for example, running live webinars just like this one today, and doing those really integrated marketing campaigns that are supported with our SDR teams as well. So it really is around driving qualified pipeline for our customers globally.
Thank you, Ryan. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris and Ryan, of course, for your company this afternoon, and hope to get some good questions and feedback from our viewers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.